How's everybody doing? All right, we'll get started here in a second. Hey, just real quick, just a reminder, you can wear whatever uniform you wear after 1800 to come to this thing. So you can dress up, you can dress down, whatever. As long as you're showing up to learn. We're still on the topic of moral leadership, and one of the things we'll get that roster around so guys, you can get credit or whatever, but one of the things I asked at the last one, if you weren't here, I asked you to spend a couple, maybe a minute, and just thinking about who's the equivalent of the best leader you've ever had, you know, and come up with a name and picture that person, and maybe you didn't do it there or then, and then I also asked you to think about somebody that maybe has not been a great leader in your experience, and then the focus is to try to emulate those skills or those competencies of that leader that you think did a great job. So, would anybody like to share? Like I said, you can say me, but it's probably not me. But would anybody like to share, like who they thought of, like off the top of their head? And this, like I said, it should just be a quick thing. Nobody wants to share?
I got one, sir.
Okay.
One of my mentors was Chief Warrant Officer Logsdon. He was also a first sergeant for me. Taught me a lot, had a lot of knowledge when it came to maintenance and that kind of stuff, and was a real leader when it comes to the troops. Put their wants and needs in front of his own many, many times, and I hope that I emulate that a little bit myself. But he's one of my mentors.
Good. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Okay, I'll share mine so you guys know. What came to my mind initially was General David Petraeus. Okay? Snapped into my mind because in 2003, I was in the 101st, and he was our division commander, and he was a great leader. He was loved by the soldiers, well respected. You know, at that time, you know, and then he quickly rose to the top. But then I thought about what the heck happened to David Petraeus. He had some ethical shortfalls, right? And I'm like, crap, I can't use him anymore. So then I had to really think, you know, because tactically, technically, organizationally, and probably individually, he was a good leader. But guess what? He had faults, and we all have faults. And you know, I'm not going to go into his personal story, but you know that cost him pretty significantly as a senior leader and somebody that a lot of people, a lot of soldiers looked up to. And you get to that level, and then it's like wham! If it can happen to that, you know, it can happen to anybody. And so then I thought, well, what next thing? I was at church and I was actually thinking about this, and I thought, well, Martin Luther. You know, I'm a Lutheran, and that one popped into my head because that individual, if you don't know Martin Luther's story, I mean, he had to put his life on the line and really made some radical changes, and you know, the whole Protestant Reformation kind of was part of his you know, he drove some of that through his doctrine and philosophy. So that's great. And then for somebody that I've personally, I won't name names, but I've had a few bad leaders in the course of my career, and the thing that has really stuck with me in those instances, it's really how they treat people, you know, and it's the lack of respect. I've had a few that created a pretty toxic environment to be in. And you could just tell, you know, they're the kind of person that shit, comes the boss again, you know, and hopefully that's none of you, you know, when you're dealing with your soldiers. But if you have a leader like that, and we'll get into that through the course of this moral leadership, but I think it's our responsibility to call that action. I do. And there's different ways of doing it. I mean, you don't have to get abrasive and get right in their face and say, you suck, you're mean to people, blah, blah, you know, you don't have to do that. There's different ways of doing that. But anyway, would anybody else like to share before we get into the class? Any leaders they want to? Yeah. Vicki, you're going to come up.
I can speak loud from here.
Okay.
I don't have a great story like you did, but what came to mind as far as the bad leaders, I used to have a boss, and outside of not treating us very nicely, ruled by fear sort of leader. He has a sign on his door, on his wall, that say, I can help one person a day, and today is not your day. That's the first thing you'll see when you walk into his office. And pretty much, he's speak very truly of him. As far as a good leader, the first thing came to my mind is actually my husband. We were doing military before he retired, but even now, when I complain about not having enough time or not able to do something, I remember he told me I was very tired, came home, and didn't have enough sleep, so didn't have a very good day. And when I told him about it, he said, well, that is poor time management. So, maybe you can think that he's, not doing his wife, but it's very...
Developmental counseling for the spouse.
When I like something, I just stand too long for doing that. And when I don't like something, I tend to procrastinate. So, coming from him, it did make me think about how I manage my day and my time and do better for the next day.
Good. Okay, we have time for one more. Anyone else want to share their examples? Okay, it's an individual thing, so you might see something that shines in somebody that you really think is what you want to emulate, and that's really what the point of it is to reflect on your experience and things. And it could be, heck, you could even say, I really think Iron Man is a great leader, from the Avengers. You could do that, whatever. But there's character traits and things like that that we'll talk about and hopefully get through that. But I'll turn it over to Corey.
Thank you, ma'am. That's good. Developmental counseling from your spouse. All right, we're probably better at giving that than receiving it, but that's good and that's helpful. And thank you, sir, for the reference to the Protestant Reformation. Boy, we could really have a fun night on that one.
That's literally what I thought about. So.
We are here for continued moral leadership training, and I want to respect and honor your time. We're going to try to get it in and out of here in no more than 45. So we'll dive right in. Some of these slides are the same that I had prepared for last time, and our tech didn't work out. It worked out tonight, barely, in the nick of time. So some of these are repeat slides, but I think they're worth repeating. Doctrinal Foundation for Moral Leadership Training is found in AR 165-1, Chaplain Corps Activities. And this DAPAM 165-19, was just published in the last month on moral leadership. And so this has a doctrinal foundation to it, and the Army values it, and I hope you do as well. Next slide, please. I don't know how far in the back you can read this font, but I'd like for some volunteers to stand up and sound off and read each of these definitions in review. Please. Go ahead, Major Whalen.
All right, the Army ethic is the set of enduring moral principles, values, beliefs, and laws that guide the Army profession and create the culture of trust essential to Army professionals in the conduct of missions, performance of duty, and all aspects of life.
I love how it ends. All aspects of life. The Army ethic is not just for on duty versus off duty, in uniform versus out of uniform. It's not just for performance of duty, it's for all aspects of life. Next definition, somebody. Stand up, sound off if you can read it.
Leadership is the activity of influencing people on providing purpose, direction, motivation to accomplish the mission, and improve the organization.
Purpose, direction, motivation. Boy, just think of some of the problems we could alleviate if our soldiers all had more purpose, more direction, and more motivation. We'd be a better Army. We'd be a better organization. Next, please. Anyone?
Moral leadership is the process of influencing people by providing moral purpose, direction, or motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization, consistent with the Army ethic.
Pretty much the same definition as leadership, but you're adding now moral purpose, moral direction, moral motivation, and really that goes hand in hand with leadership. You can't separate morality and ethics from leadership. It's a significant part of leadership. Next, character. Anybody, please.
Character is described as a moral and ethical quality that helps leaders determine what is right and gives the leader motivation to do what is right, regardless of the circumstances or consequences.
What's the key phrase you see in that definition of character repeated twice? It's twice in there.
What is right?
What is right? Character helps you determine what is right and do what is right. And it's of the utmost importance. Last one, somebody please.
Moral courage is the commitment to do what is right despite the risk, adversity, and fear. It empowers leaders to stand firm on values, principles, and convictions in taking responsibility for decisions and actions.
To do what is right. Moral courage to do what is right no matter the risk, adversity, fear. Do what is right. Are there examples in our Army and right here in this room of people determining and doing what is right? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's some really phenomenal examples throughout Army history, past and present. There's examples right here in this room. But are there also examples of not doing what is right? Colonel Soltz mentioned General Petraeus. Next slide, please. Not to focus on the negative, but these are two highlights in recent days from Army Times coming off events over this past weekend. I don't know if you saw them or not. If you like to read a print newspaper like I do and you picked up your daily Stars and Stripes from the DFAC, these are both these stories are just inside the front cover on page 3. A colonel in 06 on the left, an E7 on the right, both Green Beret Special Forces, both highly decorated, long, really successful careers. Both of their careers are certainly in all likelihood over. The E7 on the right is going to spend the rest of his life in Leavenworth. He murdered 3 people for seemingly no reason in a bowling alley in Rockford, Illinois, and injured 3 others. Now, granted, it's come out that he probably has PTSD, and I believe it said he had 4 deployments, and that could very well be the case. The colonel, not the Stars and Stripes article didn't reference it, but the Army Times article referenced that it sounded as if from testimony of his wife, whom he beat the living shit out of, threatened her life, threatened his own life in front of his 2 children, 3 children actually, and threatened law enforcement if they'd try to arrest him. After 2 hours, finally he stood down. His wife said alcohol was involved. Now, alcohol and PTSD and other varieties of mental illness can make people do some things they might normally not do. But nonetheless, I can't help but think and imagine that the lack of Army values factored in here somewhere, somehow. And I don't mean to pass judgment on either of these individuals. They've probably gone through some really hard things. All that is to say, the Army values will serve you well. In life, in relationships, and in your career. And when those Army values are not adhered to and not applied, this stuff can potentially happen. Even to decorated, highly accomplished soldiers. Can happen. And I think we'd all be foolish to say, we're immune from that. These Army values work.
Chaplain, I think you'd be foolish to say, too, that they were not enabled along the way by people who also did not adhere to Army values.
Absolutely.
And it's solely their fault, their responsibility, but
right.
Where were the battle buddies who recognized these things, who did not have the fortitude to speak up?
Totally agree. They fell through the cracks at some point, and we can hide a lot of stuff, right? But if you've got eyes to see people that are struggling, you got to try to help them. You got to try to help them. And we live in such an individualistic, isolated society. I don't want to bother anybody. It's not my business. Well, we'd probably do well to get in each other's business a little bit more. We'd probably do well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would just highlight too, I think it's in line with the Army values that if you're struggling and you have a problem, that you recognize you need help and you get the help. That's a part of the Army values. It takes personal courage, it takes selfless service. I mean, it's recognizing where you're at and the point, and the Army values supports that as well. And you know, sometimes people don't always see a way out, but I think if you actually look at those Army values and the morals associated with that, it's our individual responsibility to also try to get better if we need. Both these gentlemen probably have struggled with problems for years that they should have addressed. And you're right, your buddies should have helped them out. But
So not to dwell on the negative, and there's countless positive examples too, and Army Times is probably no different than mainstream media. You often see a lot of the negative stuff instead of much more of all the positive stuff that's out there, the positive stuff that's right in front of us every day. A lot of folks like yourself doing your job, minding your own business, living the Army values as best you know how. And so I don't want to dwell on the negative, but there are examples to those virtues that exist that we ought to recognize and learn from. Next slide, please. If I get some volunteers to read each of these sentences about the Army values in general, please, some volunteers. Just one at a time.
The Army values are part of and inherent to moral principles of the Army ethic.
Thank you. Next.
They're the baseline core and the foundation of every soldier.
Thank you. Next.
They define all soldiers, who they are, what they do, and what they stand for.
Thank you. Next, please.
They drive soldiers internally, their beliefs, and externally, their actions, at home and work, in peace and war.
All right. So they're pretty foundational. And again, as I mentioned last time, if you don't think the Army values are of the utmost importance, then I would be the first in line to question your character, your competence, and your commitment. They are of the utmost importance for us individually, for us as an organization, for us as an Army. They are of the absolute utmost importance. This isn't something you learn at basic training and put in your back pocket and move on with your career. These are of the utmost importance. And we can see positive examples as to why they are and negative examples as to why they are all across our Army as well. A couple questions for you. Are the Army values your baseline, your core, your foundation? Do they define you and drive you? They should. Increasingly throughout your career. A lot of times we say, hey, these are just for young soldiers, but not for us seasoned NCOs and officers. We've moved on from the Army values. No, we haven't. I haven't gotten these mastered yet, not even close. And if we're honest, none of us have. We're a work in progress, and there's always room for improvement with these and in these. Next slide, please. We're going to focus on two of the Army values tonight, just briefly. Respect, and again, continuing through the acrostic or the acronym. Someone want to read that brief definition for respect, please?
Treat people as they should be treated.
Really simple, and yet really, really profound, right? When we treat people as they should be treated, that can make all the difference for an individual, for an organization. And there's two key words at the bottom of the slide underlined there as to how we should treat all people in adding to respect. It's with dignity and respect. I'll go ahead and read that second sentence. Respect is the same as the golden rule. This comes from the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount. Do unto others as you would have done to you. And I like the golden rule, and I think it works, and works really, really well. But it doesn't always work. And I'm afraid sometimes it doesn't work for people who lack self-respect. Face it, if you don't truly respect yourself, you're going to be a lot more inclined to shit on other people. Right? If you truly respect yourself, you're going to be a lot more inclined to show other people respect. Because you know what that feels like. You have self-respect. In my mind, and I think that's correct, people that crap on other people probably lack self-respect. They might not show it on the surface. They might appear and act as if they have it all together. But people that crap on other people, in all likelihood, probably don't think very highly of themselves. I think that's true. So I like this other variation of the golden rule. And maybe this hits home for some of you a little bit more than do to others as you would have done to you. Do to others as you would have done to your spouse or significant other, your son or daughter, or your brother or sister. Just think of that one person that you love most in life. And how would you want them to be treated by others? That's the way you ought to treat everyone else. Dignity and respect. Someone want to read that last sentence, please? There's some key words in there.
Army leaders should consistently foster a climate that treats everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, creed, or religious belief.
Regardless of ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, creed, or religious belief. I dare say all of those things factor into this crowd right here. There's a variety, obviously, of ethnicities and ethnic backgrounds. And by the way, if you think you're 100% some certain ethnicity, probably not. People have always migrated. You're a hodgepodge of something or another. Mine is mostly from the Netherlands, Dutch, but it's not exclusively. In my mind, we're part of one human race, and that ties us together, even though we may have different origins, ethnic origins, different skin colors, different language origins. I think we're all part of the human race together, and that unites us. Gender identity, sexual orientation, creed, religious belief. There's variety right here in this room with all of those things. Great variety. Some great debates could be had about what we believe about those various things.
Chaplain, can you still respect people if you don't like some of the things they do in their background?
Can you still respect people even if you adamantly disagree with their lifestyle or their choices in some of those areas? Can you? Yeah. Of course you can. Ought you to? You absolutely, you must. You must. People, by virtue of being human, and in my Christian faith, by virtue of being created and made in the image of God, whether you believe that or not, the Army says all people are worth and worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of their lifestyle or choices in any of those areas, and then some. Everyone is worth being treated with dignity and respect. And boy, can that go a long, long ways towards the health of an individual and towards the health of an organization. Next slide, please. Selfless service. Someone want to read the brief definition for selfless service?
Put the welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates before your own.
Yeah. It was the first of these Army values, loyalty. It's not in the direct definition, but as we dug into loyalty a little bit more a couple weeks ago, loyalty also mentioned the welfare of others, both seniors, peers, and subordinates, right? The welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates before your own. Someone want to read that second sentence in the middle of the slide, please.
Unselfish, humble leaders set themselves apart as teammates who are approachable, trustworthy, and open to follower input and advice.
Let's identify the adjectives in that sentence again. I think there's about 5 of them. What are they? Describing leaders that are selfless, unselfish, humble, approachable, trustworthy, and open to follower input and advice. Open looks like this. It's a posture of receiving. Closed looks like this. You got nothing to tell me. You got nothing to offer me. I got it all figured out. I know it all. Open. Open to follower input and advice, no matter how much experience, education, subject matter expertise you have. A selfless leader is open to input and advice from others. Finally, the last sentence there. Someone want to read that one for us, please?
Selfless leaders aspire to attain goals for the greater good, beyond their own interests and benefits.
Greater good. Greater good. Living with purpose, direction, and motivation for something that's beyond yourself and bigger than yourself, a greater good. And that can be a whole lot of different things. But our service to the United States Army in this uniform, that is at least one greater good in your life. A greater good. As being proudly amongst the less than 1% currently of our population wearing the uniform of our armed forces. That's something to be really, really proud of. It's a greater good. Our very presence here, even though this is a unique and different environment and certainly not as threatening as other operational environments, just our very presence here, this is sacrifice, right? We're away from homes and jobs and families and our normal way of life for most of us. This is sacrifice, but it's for a greater good, not just our own, but for the people and institutions of Kosovo. And I hope you see that and recognize that when days are long or boring. Just our presence here. Ask a local Kosovo Serb or a local Kosovo Albanian. The large majority will tell you your presence here means a lot. and it's for a greater good. And when you live for something beyond yourself, that only adds to an increased sense of purpose, direction, and motivation. Beyond their own interests and benefits. Most of you, whether you're religious or not, or specifically even Christian or not, I see a lot of references come every Memorial Day, and rightly so, as we think about our fallen. And some of you personally know some of these, of our fallen. But there's a lot of references around Memorial Day to a really significant verse in the Bible, John 15, verse 13. It says, "Greater love is no one than this, than one who lays down his life for his or her friends." That's selfless service. Saying, I will not only live for a greater good and for others, the welfare of others beyond myself, but I'm willing to die for a greater good and for the welfare of others beyond myself. That is the epitome of selfless service. Next slide, please. Little plug here again for Band of Brothers. Not going to single anybody out tonight. But again, whether you've seen it many times like myself or haven't seen it at all, this first episode is a really good case study in the contrast of the adherence to and the application of the Army values and the lack of adherence and the lack of application to the Army values. Lieutenant Winters adhered to and applied the Army values in his leadership, and it won him the loyalty and respect of his men. And by the end of this first episode, if you know it, he took command of Easy Company from Captain Sobel. It was taken away from him because he did not adhere to the Army values and he did not apply them in his leadership of those under him. Next slide, please. This slide was in the presentation I had ready 2 weeks ago. I forgot to mention it, and I think it's really worth mentioning tonight. This is right out of U.S. Code Title 10, Section 7233, titled Requirement of Exemplary Conduct. And this is pretty profound. When we defined duty a couple weeks ago, duty was simply defined as fulfill your obligations. And I asked the question, are obligations optional? And I think we would all agree obligations are not optional. They're mandatory. What about requirements? Are requirements optional? They are not optional. Requirements are mandatory. And this is pretty profound, and this is certainly, this is doctrine. This is in keeping with the Army values and the Army ethic. All commanding officers, there's just maybe a couple of you in that category here, and others in authority. That's everybody here. All of you have some degree, some level of authority in the Army. All commanding officers and others in authority in the Army are required, are obligated, are mandated to these four things. Can I get four volunteers to read each of these four items, please?
I think we should get the commanders to stand up and do that. Who's actually in command right now? Ah, only one?
To show themselves a good example of virtue, honor, patriotism, and warning.
Number two, another commander in the house, please.
To be vigilant in inspecting the conduct of all persons who are placed under their command.
I want to pause right there on number two. Hold for number three. Number two, be vigilant in expecting the conduct of all persons who are placed under their command. Does conduct include character? It absolutely does. Inspecting conduct is not just inspecting performance of duty, it's inspecting character. Because you can't separate character from performance of duty. Number three, please.
To guard against and suppress all dissolute and immoral practices, and to correct, according to the laws and regulations of the Army, all persons who are guilty of them.
Thank you. And finally, number four.
Take all necessary and proper measures under the laws, regulations, and customs of the Army to promote and safeguard the moral, the physical well-being, and the general welfare of the officers and enlisted persons under their command or charge.
take all necessary and proper measures to safeguard the morale, the physical well-being, the general welfare of the officers and enlisted persons under their command or charge. That is a requirement for leadership. And it's a, yes.
For what it's worth, can you go back to that?
Please,
slide?
please.
This is not some random federal law.
Right.
that I pulled up. This has come up. When I say come up, it has come up in multiple investigations in the Iowa Army National Guard. And every time I read this, and I think, you know, as a prosecutor, how these absolutes, how almost impossible it is when you have absolutes like
Right.
in inspecting the conduct of all persons, guard against and suppress all dissolute, take all necessary and proper measures. I've never done that in my life.
Right.
Everyone.
Right.
I mean, maybe on occasion, but this is not some obscure reference. This is something that comes up quite frequently
Yeah.
in the legal context. The commander can tell you that, and it's easy to fail.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is, when I saw this, I thought, wow, that is really profound. That sets the bar really, really high. Impossible almost even, right? But that's the standard that we are to strive for. And again, it's not optional. It's a requirement. It's an obligation. It's a mandate for everyone here. And that's really significant. Next slide, please, I think is a really good quote. Found this in ADP 6-22 on Army leadership. It goes back a few years. Major General John Schofield addressed to the United States Corps of Cadets, 11 August 1879. Listen carefully to this. I'll read it. It's a slightly smaller font. The discipline which makes the soldiers of a free country reliable in battle is not to be gained by harsh or tyrannical treatment. On the contrary, such treatment is far more likely to destroy than to make an army. It is possible to impart instruction and to give commands in such manner and such tone of voice to inspire in the soldier no feeling but an intense desire to obey, while the opposite manner and tone of voice cannot fail to excite strong resentment and a desire to disobey. The one mode or the other of dealing with subordinates springs from a corresponding spirit in the breast of the commander. He who feels the respect which is due to others cannot fail to inspire in them regard for himself or herself, while he who feels and hence manifests disrespect toward others, especially his inferiors, cannot fail to inspire hatred against himself. Bottom line there, and my translation is the way that you treat others with dignity and respect or the lack thereof is inevitably going to reciprocate right back to you. It's inevitably going to reciprocate right back to you. You want dignity and respect that is deserving of your rank? Well, then treat people with that kind of respect and dignity that they deserve, and it will be reciprocated back to you. But treat people like shit, don't expect much. Don't expect much. And I hope that hits home. Next slide, please. I found this just this afternoon and added it just because I've probably need to do a little bit of, in just a normal way. We ought to be counseling our subordinates, right, on a routine, regular basis. I've probably neglected to do that as I should. I've got battalion chaplains that I should counsel. And so I was looking at ATP 6-22.1 this afternoon, the counseling process. It's only about 30 pages, but I found it to be really helpful again. And this is a pretty nice summary, and I don't know if you can see that in the back or not, but on the left side of this table, a summary of the counseling process at a glance. On the left side, it's got qualities to counsel effectively. It's in the middle, it's got skills to counsel appropriately, and at the bottom, it's got mistakes or errors to avoid in counseling. If you can see it at the top left, the quality for effective counseling, what's the very first quality in effective counseling? It's respect for subordinates. Man, if somebody sits down to be counseled by you and they sense right away that you do not respect them, good luck. Good luck trying to develop them. But if they sense that you have some dignity and respect for them, even if they've messed up, jacked up, that you're for them, not against them, that you want good for them, that you're willing to invest in them, they're going to buy what you have to say in your counseling. I thought that was really profound, that effective counseling begins first and foremost with respect for the person that counseling. And let's face it, oftentimes we only resort to counseling when there's been negative behaviors, right? And then we want to lay the hammer down. But we ought to be counseling on a routine, regular basis, and always with dignity and respect. I've just got one more slide left. If you'd hold going to it, please. Anybody else, anything that you've got, the wheels are turning and you're burning to say, a question you want to ask, something you want to speak or say or bring up? Anybody, anything? Otherwise, I'm just about done and we'll wrap it up here.
Just one thing on counseling, we're going to kind of cover some of this more in a topic later too, regarding counseling and just there's different ways, and you know there's books out there. One that we'll probably talk through is Crucial Conversations. You know, when you got to have a difficult conversation with somebody, you know, how do you approach that? And it's usually from the heart, and it starts with respect. The other thing we'll talk about a little bit is emotional intelligence. You know, that's something we all probably need to work on. These are soft skills, and I think some of that stuff bleeds right into, you know, the Army's counseling process, and probably why we don't do a great job of it, really, because a lot of us just don't think like that, you know, and we're not used to being counseled, you know, especially not performance counseling. Sometimes that stuff can get kind of hard. So it is hard to be respectful. Yeah. Anybody, anything else for the good of the group? Yes. Ma'am.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with your Band of Brothers reference before.
No problem.
I can't let this go. So Captain Sobel, he was sent to training. He was sent to a training battalion, and there might be a place for him. I wouldn't quite say that he didn't care about his people.
Yeah.
I think he did. He just went about it the right way. So there might be a place for Captain Sobel, for what it's worth.
I appreciate that. No, and you're absolutely right? Because we are allowed to, and really honestly even expected to some degree, make mistakes. It's not a matter of if, but when. And it's how we respond to those and how we learn and how we grow. And so that's a good point, ma'am, and I'm right. No. I appreciate that. The pushback is good, and I don't have it all figured out and don't have all the answers, so I really do appreciate that perspective. And that's right on, right? There's some really good leaders out there that have made mistakes, and even sometimes some significant ones, but have learned and been developed and continued. And so I don't mean to convey that to write folks off, right, when they don't meet the standard. Anybody else?
Sir, I'll say one thing on empathy real quick.
Yes.
I don't have a lot of experience with back in RFC days. There was a former E5 who was going green or gold, and he seemed to think that having empathy was a problem within the Army.
Right.
But I think the mistake that he made, and along with a lot of others, is they confuse empathy with sympathy. I think it's good to define the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Sympathy is more like just having pity no matter the situation, and empathy is more understanding the situation and knowing the emotions and what the soldier needs.
Exactly. Empathy is identifying with people. Where are you at? Where are you coming from? Why is it that you're struggling this way, right? And it's digging a little bit deeper to understand where people are at and where they're coming from. And when you have empathy, that generally leads to connection. And where there's connection then is trust. And some growth can come from that. Anybody else? Yes?
I think from personal experience and what I've seen, something that affects another or affects the motivation of leaders or good leaders, it's personal bias. You know, everybody understands that they are they come from a tight unit, from a tight, let's say the CAV or the engineers or the infantry. They are together. When you put a good leader that's just not related to that particular unit, it doesn't matter, because sometimes that leader just have a blind spot and don't let the other person develop as much as they should. Honestly, like I had one of the best commanders at some point. He just went unnoticed because he was not part of that particular line on the company.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. It's important, you know, for leaders to recognize our own deficiencies and growth areas, and our own biases certainly as well. Thank you for your... Yes, please.
Go back to the slide. You don't have to go back to the slide, but there was a slide that talked about selfless service.
Yeah.
Part of the panel.
Go ahead and go back to it. It's just a few clicks.
I like to think critically, does the Army foster an environment where we put a lot of merit and emphasis on selfless service? I mean, everybody has their own motivations for doing whatever. Okay?
Right.
OER bullet, RCOM, whatever. But, you know, the greater good, otherwise you're not going to put the uniform on. You could do another job and get paid more, whatever. Everybody has their own motivations. Do we place too much emphasis in, you know, trying to solve, you know, some of the issues with ascension in the military and placing your needs before others? Because I have seen people do that, and I have seen them get kicked around and not get promoted and come in last. And I'm not saying that it's an Army thing. It's everywhere. Nice guys finish last, right? What can we do? Maybe you know, a homework assignment for y'all is to think critically. What could the Army be doing better to promote some of these things that we're raising? And it's not perfect. The Army's not perfect, and no organization is.
Hey Ben, I think let's dial that down to what can our brigade and our organization, you know, whether they're the med, the aviation, what can we do to foster that? Because we're not going to fix the Army's problem. But I think you're onto something. I mean, a lot of it, you know, it goes back to, you know, and we don't.
Is that Major Sandvik back there?
It's me.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, go. Yes, please.
I actually, what Ben said, I actually even take it a step further and use an example. So what do we as soldiers since 9/11, what are we striving for as soldiers? Have that combat patch, right? If we don't have that combat patch on the right shoulder, is our career, is our military service, is it in question? It shouldn't be, but it is, right? And so to take it a step further, what Ben's saying is that selfless service doesn't come in forms of intrinsic values, or not intrinsic, you know, things that you see. It comes from what you're doing it for. That's what selfless service is. You know, you want to serve your state, you want to serve your country, you want to serve in a particular unit because you're a fourth generation soldier. You're doing it because you want to do it for not only for yourself but for, you know, the state and the nation.
Yeah.
So we sometimes think of combat patch. If you don't have a combat patch, you know, you really haven't had a successful career.
Right.
And you've seen that a lot since 9/11. You know, soldiers here are getting a combat patch.
Right.
I know in particular there's a certain newly promoted captain. This is his second deployment. Doesn't have a combat patch. But you know what? It matters.
Right.
You serving matters, no matter what, in what capacity.
Right. No, thank you. And Major Smith, I appreciate that as well too. And I don't have the answer.
But we can start talking about it.
We can talk about it, right? And what crossed my mind is the simple fact that, okay, here we are, at least for a bit, addressing this, talking about it. And so rewind to July this summer, and due to COVID and a few drills, I'm pretty new as the brigade chaplain yet and have a lot to learn, still do a lot to learn, a lot to figure out. And I'm in the office with Colonel Adams at Camp Dodge and talking about the deployment, some of the goals that I had. And I had, sir, I think it'd be really worth our time, and I find really valuable what Army doctrine calls moral leadership training. And I'm really thankful that Colonel Adams said, I think that's valuable and worth our time as well too. I know there'd be commanders that say, but we don't have time for this nonsense. We got better things to do. This isn't mission essential. This is absolutely mission essential. It's absolutely mission essential. This is at the utmost of importance, even though it can so easily seem to be something that's not. it's really, really important. So just the fact that we are, even just for a bit, every couple of weeks addressing some of these things, and hopefully this conversation leads to further conversations in your sections and whatnot. So I appreciate your participation. Let's wrap it up here in same way that we did last time, and let's bring it down to our organization now. And you know, for those of you, you know, Med Company, MP Platoon, Aviation Battalion, that are coming in from the outside to organization, you're a part of our organization, and no less so for this rotation and this MOB. We are the Rider Brigade, and if you don't know the Rider Brigade's history, or you haven't read cover to cover or at least skimmed the Rider Blue Book, again, for those coming in for this deployment from the outside to us, really would commend the Rider Blue Book to you. Last slide, there's one more. Yeah, there we go. Colonel Soltz and I, a conversation a few months ago, he mentioned this phrase, the Rider Way. What's something that kind of can get right at the heart of who the Rider Brigade is and what the Rider Brigade stands for? And as I pondered that and thought about that, when I discovered this statement on conduct, these few paragraphs in the Rider Blue Book, I was really drawn to this. And this, in my mind, if not exhaustively, at least sufficiently really captures, in my mind, what is the Rider Way. I'll read it if you want to follow along or just listen. As a Rider Brigade soldier, you are part of the history of the 2nd Brigade and 34th Infantry Division. Your individual conduct must reflect the highest commitment to the Army values, the soldier's creed, and the legacy of the 2nd Brigade, 34th Infantry Division, which, by the way, has really a tremendous legacy. Soldiers of the Rider Brigade treat fellow soldiers and members of our communities with dignity and respect. Rider Brigade soldiers have demonstrated throughout history that when the task is difficult and the tensions are high, our conduct as professional soldiers is beyond reproach. All soldiers must continue to build trust and partnerships, not just in our formations, but also with our local communities. Soldiers represent the brigade that has always believed in equal opportunity and will always speak up against sexual harassment and sexual assault. May that always be the case. Soldiers will have the moral courage to say, not in our squads, platoons, companies, battalions, and not in our brigade. That's the Rider Way, and it's been commended to me and to all of us. I commend it to you again as a way that will serve you individually and will serve our organization very, very well for the good of everyone in it. That's all I've got. Sir?
Yep. Turn it over. Hey, as always, homework assignment. Okay, got a pen and paper? If you don't have a pen and paper, that's fine. Here's your homework assignment. It's tied to respect, and this is one that you probably all heard already because the Sergeant Major of the Army's used it. And you know, one of the things we have down here, it says not in our squads, platoons, companies, battalions, and not in our brigade. But we also want to talk about inclusion, and I think one of the things, you know, that we can say is, you know, this is what we want, this is my squad, you know, and that whole mantra with that. But part of it's asking the question of your force. And one of the things that Sergeant Major Grinston used was, you know, just go around and ask some of your soldiers, the folks that you don't know, how did you grow up? And I think that's a good one. I've used that a few times, probably on some of y'all, but because I think it bridges the gap a little bit. You don't have to use how did you grow up as the, you know, exact words, but it's really getting to the root of getting to know that person a little bit differently. You know, because when you ask somebody, how did you grow up? They're like, what do you mean? You know, where am I from? Or, you know, so you kind of, then they get to talking and you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it leads a pretty neat story, you know, and you learn a lot about the individuals through that. Just that simple question. So this is part of the respect. And I think Captain Urano mentioned cognitive bias. So I'm an old, at the end of my tenure, colonel, a white guy from Midwest. I don't know everything. I mean, there's probably people in here that I'm old enough to be your father, you know, which is, it scares the shit out of me most of the time, you know. It shows, wow, I'm old. But that probably means I don't know a whole lot about what's going on with you. You know, I just assume because there's things that, you know, back in the day that I did that are probably similar that you did, but you know, kind of coming into those questions with that frame of mind, like, okay, I don't know everything. And I'm not going to assume I'm an expert on you know, as an individual, but, you know, how did you grow up? I want to learn a little bit about that. So one of your tasks is to go and ask at least a couple people that you don't know very much about, and just ask them, how did you grow up? Or ask them something similar. It doesn't have to be that. That's one. And then, you know, I asked this back in Germany. It kind of ties into selfless service a little bit. You know, this is a question I think that you need to sit down and probably talk about, and I'll share with mine. But one of the questions I asked was, you know, what would you personally jump on a hand grenade for? You know, what things would go, you know, or take a bullet for? Or inverse, what would push you to the point where you would kill somebody? You know, and you would sacrifice that part of yourself. That's, you know, what values and things, you know, and for me personally, you know, I thought about this a little bit, and it's a hard question to think about. You know, obviously, for me, my family is one of the most important things, and if anybody threatens my family, I will use extreme violence to protect them. You know, that's one area, but I also think anyone in here, because we're all part of a family. You know, we're the Rider Brigade. It doesn't matter who you are. You know, I would take a bullet for you. You know, and that is exactly what I would do. I'd take a bullet for the chaplain. He can't carry a weapon, so he's not going to shoot back. So, but I would get in front of him because he's in my squad, and you know, and I respect him, and you know, I love him as an individual. So I think that's what we got to get to really move this organization forward, is get to that level of care, and we have the time here to do that. So I think you should ask yourself that question and really put some thought into that. What is my values? What would I sacrifice? You know, what would I do to make this organization better? You know, that's really what selfless services is about, is sitting down and thinking about, not me, you know, the organization as well. What can I do to make this organization better tomorrow? What can I do tomorrow to make the day better for somebody else? Okay? Any questions?